So joining us now, former Biden Treasury Department official Brent Nyman. Brent's trade-related research was used by the Trump administration as a basis for its tariff rates. And Brent, you had a new op-ed in the New York Times posted before yesterday's tariffs pause entitled, "The Trump White House cited my research to justify tariffs. It got it all wrong." And you write in part, quote, "The administration's trade office cites our work, but mentions a different result from the paper, which found a low pass-through rate to the listed prices to retailers. The Trump administration then plugs a rate of 25% into its formula. Where does 25% come from? Is it related to our work? I don't know. The reciprocal tariffs have enormous implications for workers, firms, consumers, and stock markets around the globe. But the methodology note offers shockingly few details. Had the trade office instead used a value closer to the 95% number from our work, as I believe it should have done, the computed tariffs would have been as little as 1/4 of what they are."
So Brent, first, we'll get to the details of that. But first, let me just ask you about tariffs in general, because Democrats actually find themselves in a difficult position that if they are too anti-tariff, just across the board, they're going to alienate a lot of working class voters, a lot of middle class voters that they've lost over the last 30 years. So what's your take on tariffs in general?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. It depends on exactly which tariffs and with what purpose we're talking about would be my take. But I think yesterday, for instance, the pause placed on what I viewed as very problematic reciprocal tariffs that were based on eliminating all bilateral trade deficits, which should not be a goal of our trade policy, because not all bilateral trade deficits are bad. I'm glad that they've put a pause on that. I hope they completely eliminate it and withdraw that entire policy. I think it's creating a lot of uncertainty and would do harm to our relationship to a lot of countries. I don't see why we need to put a tax on the purchase of, vanilla beans from Madagascar. Separately, the tariffs on China might be viewed as a very different thing. 10 years ago, we had 3% import tariffs on China. 10 weeks ago, we had about 20% import tariffs on China. 10 minutes ago, I think it's well over 100%. We have real, concerns and needs to negotiate with China. Industrial subsidies would be one real concern. But the way I view it, those are not concerns specific to the U.S. Some of those Chinese practices impact Europe, impact Japan, just as they impact us. So I would be trying to get the help of our allies, of those other affected countries, instead of also applying tariffs to them.
So Brent, I want to underline one thing that maybe Americans that don't study economics or read your articles would have any reason to understand that. But just all trade deficits are not created equally. You can look at China. China's in a far different position than, say, Vietnam. You put 49% tariffs on Vietnam because you have a trade deficit. We're going to have a trade deficit with Vietnam, because if Nike or Adidas or whomever figures out that Vietnam knows how to make sneakers cheaply, that's going to make the most economic sense for American consumers. But we don't expect Vietnam to be buying a ton of American products, right?
Yeah, Joe, I cited in my article a quote from a Nobel Prize winner named Bob Solow. And he said, my barber, I run a chronic deficit with my barber who doesn't buy a thing from me. And what he was saying, of course, is that his barber doesn't enroll in economics courses, and therefore his spending is entirely one way. And there's nothing unnatural about that. We can all relate to that, from our day-to-day lives. We all run chronic trade deficits with our grocery store. I'm not sure there's anything necessarily that we take from that says anything is unfair. So putting all this effort into eliminating or taxing the ability of Americans to buy clothing from Sri Lanka just because they don't buy high-tech equipment and gas turbines from the United States. Once you have that goal of your trade policy to eliminate those kind of trade imbalances, I think it's going to be very hard to come up with a sensible policy. The pause that was placed on reciprocal tariffs, if it's eliminated, and I hope they simply stop that policy altogether instead of just pause it, that would hopefully point things in a better direction.
So, Brent, you were a high-ranking official of the Treasury Department in the prior administration. You had a Secretary of the Treasury working above you. You had the Council of Economic Advisors advising the President of the United States. What is your view, and how does it happen that in this particular case, the world economy came that close to collapse because basically two men, Donald Trump and Peter Navarro? How does that happen, and what's the level of danger when things like that do happen in an administration?
Look, I don't know what the policy process was behind this announcement, but what I can tell you, and the way I got wrapped up in this whole thing in the first place, was that the methodology that was released explaining what was, in my view, potentially an incredibly consequential international economic policy that I think would have done real harm to Americans and real harm to the global economy. It was explained in roughly 2 pages and opened up any number of questions that I would hope would be really vetted with inside and outside economists to a thorough degree before the policy was announced. In reaction to that methodology, a lot of people spoke up. There was a comment that was very influential, I think, from AEI economists, private sector economists, business leaders, all spoke up saying, this might not make sense, and I'm glad that everyone did, and I'm glad that the White House has put a pause on that part of the policy. I hope they scrap it entirely.
Brent, I'm curious, have you been able to figure out the origin of this formula? Because I have tried, and everybody involved in this administration has basically said, not it. It wasn't me. The Treasury Secretary says he was not responsible. Peter Navarro, a trade advisor, says he was not responsible. The chair of the Council of Economic Advisors publicly said they were not responsible. They proposed something else, and someone else in the administration came up with this formula. Do you know where it came from?
I don't know who designed or endorsed the policy, no. But I certainly hope that using bilateral imbalances and the desire of eliminating all of them with all of our trade partners, it will never again be the premise of U.S. trade policy. And then we don't have to talk, hopefully, ever again about that horrible formula.
All right, former Treasury Department official Brent Nyman, thank you very much for coming on the show this morning. And Catherine